It is Tuesday, October 15th, and LA County declaring a state of emergency. The order stating ICE is too effective, that too many illegals are leaving their state, that it's become a real, genuine emergency, they say. Really? LA County voting to continue paying the rent and legal aid of illegal aliens effective immediately this morning. Also, big news on the financial networks behind Antifa and these left-wing terror groups. Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, making a big announcement on what they've uncovered thus far. And the Reaper of D.C., the hatchet man himself, Russ Vought, breaking his silence this morning, delivering a nightmare for Democrats, revealing which agencies are about to receive mass layoffs on top of the 4,000 people, federal workers, he already laid off. Wait till you see this.
LA County has declared a state of emergency over the immigration raids. The Board of Supervisors voted today. Board members say the raids are preventing people from going to work and forcing some businesses to close. The emergency allows the board to look at enacting an eviction moratorium and other protections for people impacted by the raids.
LA County this morning declaring a state of emergency over the ICE activity in their county and doubling down on providing free rent for tenants who they say fall behind as a result of the enforcement actions of ICE. The LA County Board of Supervisors making this move as the numbers of self-deportations in the county skyrocketing. If you read the emergency order, it's not the Trump administration's physical arrests and deportations that prompted this. It's the self-deportations. Over 30% of LA is illegal, undocumented people. And they're scared, folks, frightened that if they're caught by ICE, they'll ruin their one shot at returning to the U.S. legally. So they're leaving on their own, self-deporting, which is why county supervisors Lindsay Horvath and Janice Hahn introduced this emergency order today. We need to do something to convince these people to stay. Risk your future. We're asking you to risk being caught and barred permanently from re-entry. And in return, we'll use taxpayer funds to pay your rent and other legal services. It's bananas.
10 million people who live here in LA County are waking up to news this morning that their tax dollars may soon be going to help illegal immigrants and their families. This after a controversial vote last night. The LA County Board of Supervisors voting 4-1 on Tuesday to approve a, quote, immigration emergency declaration in the county in response to recent ICE raids here in LA. Now, that emergency declaration will give LA County the power to provide taxpayer-funded rent relief, legal services, and other assistance to those the county says have been affected by recent ICE raids. Now, the two LA County supervisors who first introduced this declaration say immigrants in LA have been, quote, living under threat from ICE and help is needed.
Yesterday's vote amongst county supervisors authorizes financial resources locally at the county level, and it also triggers the state and federal assistance clause, triggering the state to respond to the impacts of the raids and expedite contracting to address the crisis. So yes, expedite our tax dollars to protect illegal aliens, pay their rent and lawyers, free lawyers. Think about how backwards this is, right? The federal government is using our tax dollars to remove illegals, yet the state of California is using our tax dollars to keep the illegals here. How utterly demented is that? Almost as if they're trying purposefully to waste our money. Meanwhile, the Trump administration continuing to unmask the funding networks funneling money to groups like Antifa. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent yesterday announcing the Treasury Department's now leading an effort to find and hold accountable these people, the same way he says we did after 9/11, how Treasury led the effort to track terror financing around the world, saying we're doing the same thing today, using the same strategy, the same tools to follow the money behind Antifa and these other violent domestic terror groups. Watch what he said.
And many of these organizations have been financed by nonprofits, and it's going to stop. And we are going to, as they always say, follow the money. When you see these groups where all the signs match. They have hundreds of the same umbrellas that they're using. After they cause the mayhem, they have the same lasers that they're using to blind our police force. How are they constructed? Because this takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of organization, and we are going to do that. We have started to compile lists, put together networks, and there's a long record here. And we don't know how much of the support's coming in from overseas. We don't know how much being supported by U.S. nonprofits, C3s that give money to C4s. But this is mission critical for us now, just as after 9/11 and Osama bin Laden, the ultimate culprit, was captured. We are operationalizing this here at Treasury, and we are going to track down who is responsible for this. So Charlie's death has set this off, and we are determined not only to honor him, but to keep our country safe and to ensure freedom of speech on both sides. That we can't, as conservatives, we can't be afraid to go out and speak. I know people are canceling speeches. They're having to bring down the size of the rallies. President Trump was millimeters away from death, and he was not deterred, and we're not going to be deterred.
And it is super important that the Treasury Department is part of this process, because Treasury oversees the IRS. And unlike normal groups, normal political groups, even like nonprofits, LLCs, even 501c3s, Antifa doesn't have a legal structure. There is no LLC or EIN number behind them. To track the money, they need to look at the finances of these left-wing legitimate groups like these NGOs and track and trace where those groups are sending their money. It's very tricky business. Think about it. If you were Antifa, how do you get hundreds of millions in annual funding if you don't exist? How is that possible? How's it legal? How's it possible to not set off a red flag somewhere? Well, from what we understand, a large part of how they do it is they use charity sites such as GoFundMe, for example, and others. I'm not sure if GoFundMe is actually used, but those types of sites, Antifa will set up a page there to donate, for example, to help illegals affected by ICE, donate to help this cause, and these big NGOs then pour the money in. All of this now being investigated. Scott Bessent saying yesterday that this is now mission critical for the Treasury Department. In another story, the Reaper of DC unveiling exactly what President Trump means when he says the layoffs from this government shutdown will affect Democrat agencies. Russ Vought going on Real America's Voice and laying out what to expect in the coming days. Because yes, the federal government is still shut down, folks. Chuck Schumer holding the government hostage, worried about his re-election campaign next year. That's what Republicans are saying, accusing him of. But the longer this goes on, the more legal unwinding the Trump administration can do legally to the federal government, shrinking the federal workforce and focusing on agencies and programs that Democrats passed in their Inflation Reduction Act last year. Watch what Russ Vought has in store for Chuck Schumer and Democrats. Watch this.
So are we talking 10 people? We talking 1,000 people? We talking 10,000 people?
We're definitely talking thousands of people. Much of the reporting has been based on kind of court snapshots, which they've articulated is in the 4,000 number of people. But that's just a snapshot, and I think it'll get much higher. And we're going to keep those riffs rolling throughout this shutdown because we think it's important to stay on offense for the American taxpayer and the American people in getting a government that, if there's an opportunity to have less bureaucracy, and think of Green New Deal programs at the Department of Energy, think the Minority Business Development Agency at Commerce that divvies up business grants on the basis of race, think environmental justice at EPA, think about CISA. CISA was an area that we riffed, which was participating in censorship of the American people. We want to be very aggressive where we can be in shuttering the bureaucracy, not just the funding, but the bureaucracy that we now have an opportunity to do that. And that's where we're going to be looking for our opportunities.
Schumer now in this lose-lose scenario, scared to vote and fund the government, but knowing not doing so is just bad for the country, and worse, for preserving the administrative state he fought so hard for over the years to set up. And what we're hearing is the No King's March on Saturday isn't even intended for Trump. It's intended for Schumer to make sure he gets the message. Do not reopen the government, Chuck. Let me know what you think about this. Schumer basically doing the bidding of special interest groups instead of his constituents in New York. That's what's happening here. It's what it seems like. Pretty remarkable. And another insane story, a big story, the Supreme Court hearing a very important case this morning, a major case, a major redistricting case that could determine the fate of the Federal Voting Rights Act, but also unlock a path for Republicans to pick up a whole host of new congressional seats next year. Dems very concerned about this case, and in the oral arguments this morning on whether a majority black congressional district is really racial gerrymandering, like almost all cases that the court hears as of late, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson making headlines, and not in a good way. This morning, Justice Jackson directly comparing black people not electing their preferred candidates to disabled people not being able to enter buildings. That was essentially her argument, declaring we must draw congressional districts based on race because, and I quote, they don't have equal access to the voting system, so they're disabled. How on earth did this lady get confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court? Watch.
I guess I'm thinking of it, of the fact that remedial action, absent discriminatory intent, is really not a new idea in the civil rights laws. And my kind of paradigmatic example of this is something like the ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people with disabilities. And so it was discriminatory in effect because these folks were not able to access these buildings. And it didn't matter whether the person who built the building or the person who owned the building intended for them to be exclusionary. That's irrelevant. Congress said the facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here. The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting system, right? They're disabled. In fact, we use the word disable in Milligan. We say that's a way in which you see that these processes are not equally open.
Justice Jackson appearing to forget what her role is as a U.S. Supreme Court justice, not to argue for one side or the other. It's to look at the case and apply it to the U.S. Constitution. Let me know what you think about this. Does it not seem like every case that we hear about with her, that every case they look at, she argues like she's a defense attorney? And if, by the way, if the court overturned Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, Republican-controlled states anticipated to pick up at least 19 more seats in the House next year.
So this is what the party pickups would be for congressional districts. Republicans, 5. Missouri, 1. North Carolina, 1. Ohio, 2 or 3. Indiana, 1 or 2. Florida, still discussion down there, but that could be another gold mine for them if they tipped it even further their way. Kansas, 1. New Hampshire, 1. And Nebraska. Democrats, Utah, California, Maryland. Look at this. If you offset California and Texas, Missouri and Utah, North Carolina and Maryland, everything left over is an advantage to the Republicans. And don't forget, the Supreme Court is considering what could really be the end of the Voting Rights Act, which would protect minority groups. So you don't have a state that's half black, for example, that elects only one congressional member and everybody else goes to the Republicans that would represent that population in some ways. So if that is gutted, Democrats could lose 19 seats. This would be a huge amount. But this is also a measure of how much the White House is concerned about this, because Donald Trump knows if the Democrats get the House again, There could be new investigations just like last time. There could be a new impeachment. There could be a lot of impediment to these plans that right now the Republicans in the House and Senate are letting run like a freight train.
So you wonder why these people are fighting so hard for Prop 15 California. This is it. All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.